Summer 1940. RAF Hornchurch Airfield, Essex, England. Squadron leader James Leithart watches another Spitfire slide off the runway in a cloud of dust and twisted metal. The pilot climbs out, shaken but alive. It's becoming a grim pattern. The aircraft are failing at the worst possible moments, and it has nothing to do with enemy fire. But here's what makes this crisis terrifying. These pilots aren't incompetent. The planes aren't battle damaged. And the problem isn't mechanical failure in the traditional sense. The Supermarine Spitfire, the aircraft that every history book tells you won the Battle of Britain, had a design flaw so catastrophic that it was giving German pilots a decisive tactical advantage in every dogfight. RAF pilots were being forced to choose between pursuing enemy aircraft or keeping their engines running. They couldn't do both. And the clock was ticking. Hitler's invasion barges were assembling across the Channel. The Luftwaffe was launching daily raids. Britain needed a solution, and they needed it immediately. The answer wouldn't come from the brilliant designers at Supermarine. It wouldn't come from RAF headquarters or the Ministry of Aircraft Production. It would come from a 31-year-old female engineer named Beatrice Schilling, working in a male-dominated research laboratory, who would solve the problem with a component so simple you could hold it in the palm of your hand. A brass restrictor disc, that's it. A small metal washer with a precisely drilled hole in it. But to understand why this tiny piece of metal became one of the most crucial technical innovations of the Battle of Britain, we need to understand the engineering nightmare that was crippling Britain's fighter force every single day. In the summer of 1940, Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany. France had fallen in 6 weeks. The British Expeditionary Force had barely escaped at Dunkirk, abandoning virtually all their heavy equipment. Hitler's Wehrmacht controlled Europe from Norway to the Pyrenees. The only thing standing between Britain and Operation Sea Lion, Hitler's invasion plan, was the Royal Air Force, and the RAF's survival depended on 2 fighter aircraft, the Hawker Hurricane and the Supermarine Spitfire. Now, the Spitfire has achieved legendary status: elliptical wings, Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, graceful, deadly, iconic. Museums dedicate entire exhibitions to it. It appears on commemorative coins and postage stamps. In the British imagination, the Spitfire represents the defiance of 1940. But legends obscure reality, and the reality in the summer of 1940 was that the Spitfire had a critical vulnerability that German pilots had learned to exploit with devastating effectiveness. The problem emerged during negative G-force maneuvers. When a Spitfire pilot pushed the control stick forward to dive away from an attack, the Merlin engine would cough, sputter, and die. For a critical few seconds, the aircraft became a powerless glider at the exact moment when the pilot needed maximum power to escape. A few seconds doesn't sound like much, but in aerial combat, where aircraft approach each other at a combined speed of 600 miles per hour, even 2 seconds is an eternity. It's the difference between escape and a burst of 20mm cannon fire through your cockpit. To understand what was crippling these aircraft, you need to understand how the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine worked. The Merlin was a magnificent piece of engineering. 12 cylinders arranged in a V configuration, supercharged, producing 1,030 horsepower. It was one of the finest aircraft engines ever built, and it would power not just the Spitfire, but also the Hurricane, the Lancaster bomber, and the American P-51 Mustang. But the Merlin had one critical design characteristic. It used a float carburetor fuel delivery system, borrowed from automotive technology. Here's how it worked. Fuel sat in a small chamber inside the carburetor. A hollow float, like a miniature buoy, sat on top of this fuel, As the fuel level dropped, the float dropped with it, opening a valve that allowed more fuel to flow in. When the fuel level rose, the float rose, closing the valve. Simple, reliable, proven technology. This system worked perfectly in cars. It worked perfectly in aircraft during level flight and during positive G maneuvers when pilots pulled back on the stick to climb or turn. But when a pilot pushed the stick forward into a negative G dive, physics turned deadly. In negative G, everything in the aircraft experiences upward force. The pilot strains against his harness. Loose objects float toward the canopy. And in the carburetor, the fuel doesn't stay at the bottom of the chamber where it belongs. Instead, it surges upward, flooding over the top of the float chamber. Two things happen simultaneously. First, the float rises to the top of its travel, closing the fuel valve and cutting off fuel supply to the engine. Second, the surge of fuel floods the carburetor throat, creating an over-rich mixture that drowns the spark plugs. The result? Complete engine power loss, lasting critical seconds until gravity reasserts itself and the fuel settles back where it belongs.
Now, you might think RAF pilots could simply avoid negative G maneuvers. Just don't push the stick forward. Problem solved. But that reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of aerial combat tactics in 1940. The Messerschmitt Bf-109, the Luftwaffe's primary fighter, used a different fuel system. Instead of carburetors, the 109's Daimler-Benz engine used direct fuel injection. A pump forced fuel directly into the cylinders under pressure. No floats, no chambers, no fuel surge problems. This meant the Bf-109 could enter negative G maneuvers without any loss of power. German pilots learned this quickly. The tactic became standard. When a Spitfire got on your tail, you didn't turn, you didn't climb, you pushed the stick forward and entered a steep dive. The Spitfire pilot faced an impossible choice: follow the dive and watch your engine die, leaving you helpless, or roll inverted and pull back on the stick, converting the negative G into positive G to maintain engine power, but losing precious seconds and distance while your opponent escapes. RAF pilots developed a dark joke: the Messerschmitt has one more gear than we do, straight down. But this wasn't just about frustrated pilots losing targets. It was about survival, because the tactic worked in reverse too. When a Bf-109 attacked from above, the Spitfire pilot's instinctive reaction was to push forward into a dive to gain speed and evade. But doing so killed the engine at the exact moment the German pilot was closing to firing range. British pilots were dying not because they made tactical errors, but because their aircraft betrayed them at the critical moment. By the summer of 1940, this wasn't a secret. RAF Fighter Command knew about the problem. Pilots complained bitterly. Supermarine's chief designer, Reginald Mitchell, had died in 1937, but his successors were well aware of the carburetor issue. The obvious solution was to redesign the fuel system with direct injection, like the Germans. But that would require re-engineering the Merlin engine from scratch, retooling factories, and grounding the Spitfire fleet for months during installation. Britain didn't have months. The Luftwaffe was flying bomber raids daily. German invasion barges were assembling in channel ports. Intelligence suggested Hitler would launch Operation Sea Lion as soon as the Luftwaffe achieved air superiority. Fighter Command was losing aircraft faster than factories could replace them. More critically, they were losing trained pilots. You can build a Spitfire in 4 months. Training a competent fighter pilot takes 2 years. Every combat loss, every pilot killed because their engine failed during evasive maneuvers, brought Britain closer to the moment when they simply wouldn't have enough fighters in the air to contest German air superiority. The Air Ministry issued directives. Engineers at Rolls-Royce proposed modifications. Test pilots flew experimental configurations. Nothing worked adequately. The float carburetor was fundamentally unsuited to negative G flight, and no amount of tweaking could change that basic physics. What they needed wasn't a redesign, they needed a stopgap measure. Something quick, simple, and cheap that could be installed on existing aircraft without grounding the fleet. They needed someone who could think laterally about the problem. They needed Beatrice Schilling.
Beatrice Schilling was not a typical engineer for 1940s Britain. Born in 1909, she had fought her way into engineering at a time when the profession was almost exclusively male. She studied at the University of Manchester, earning a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering in 1932, then a master's degree in mechanical engineering in 1933, when most women were discouraged from university education entirely. She was also a motorcycle racer, competing in speed trials and reliability runs at a time when women were barely allowed to drive cars unsupervised. On August 24, 1934, she lapped the Brooklyn circuit at over 100 miles per hour on her Norton motorcycle, earning the prestigious Gold Star Award. This wasn't someone who accepted conventional limitations. By 1940, she worked at the Royal Aircraft Establishment in Farnborough as a scientific officer in the engine department. Her official title belied her expertise. She was one of the few people in Britain who truly understood both the theoretical physics and practical mechanics of aircraft engine performance. When the carburetor problem landed on her desk in 1940, she approached it differently than the male engineers who had struggled with it before her. They had tried to fix the carburetor. She decided to restrict it. Her reasoning was elegant. The problem wasn't that the float chamber existed. The problem was that fuel could surge upward too freely during negative G. What if you could limit the rate at which fuel flowed into the carburetor, preventing the surge from flooding the system? She designed a brass restrictor disc. It was roughly the size of a coin, perhaps 2 inches in diameter. In the center was a precisely drilled hole, carefully calculated to allow sufficient fuel flow for full engine power under normal conditions, while preventing catastrophic flooding during negative G maneuvers. This disc would install in the fuel line just before the carburetor. Under normal flight conditions, the restrictor would allow adequate fuel flow for full engine power. But during negative G, when fuel tried to surge forward, the restrictor would limit the flow rate, preventing the catastrophic flooding that killed the engine. It was simple. It was cheap. A machinist could make 100 of them in an afternoon from scrap brass, and it could be installed in about 20 minutes per aircraft without any major modifications. But would it work?
Schilling's restrictor underwent rigorous flight testing at Farnborough in 1940. Test pilots deliberately put Spitfires through aggressive negative G maneuvers that would normally cause complete engine failure. The results were remarkable. The engine no longer died completely. It would hesitate slightly, lose perhaps 10% of power for a brief moment, then continue running strongly. Pilots could now follow BF-109s into negative G dives without becoming helpless gliders. Was it perfect? No. The restrictor reduced maximum fuel flow slightly, which meant peak engine performance dropped by about 3%. In a prolonged full-throttle climb, the engine ran slightly leaner than optimal. But in exchange, pilots got an aircraft that wouldn't betray them during the exact maneuver that could save their lives. The RAF called it the RAE restrictor. Pilots called it Miss Schilling's orifice, a cheeky double entendre that probably would have mortified official RAF communications, but perfectly captured the gallows humor of combat pilots. Production began in late 1940. By early 1941, Schilling and a small team toured RAF bases across Britain, traveling on her motorcycle between stations, installing the restrictors on every Spitfire and Hurricane in Fighter Command. The modification took 20 minutes per aircraft. Squadrons could retrofit their entire fleet in a single day. By March 1941, the installation was complete. Every operational RAF fighter had Schilling's restrictor installed, and it transformed combat effectiveness.
Quantifying the exact impact of Schilling's restrictor is impossible. We can't know how many pilots survived specifically because their engine kept running during a critical dive. We can't count the BF-109s that were shot down because they could no longer escape by diving with impunity. But we can track the operational changes. Starting in early 1941, RAF combat reports show pilots reporting successful pursuits of diving Messerschmitts. Pilots described being able to stay with German fighters through negative G maneuvers that previously would have meant automatic disengagement. Luftwaffe tactical documents from late 1940 and 1941, captured after the war, show German pilots noting that the engine failure dive tactic against Spitfires had become less effective. They couldn't understand why, but they recognized that their previous advantage had diminished. While the most critical phase of the Battle of Britain was already over by the time the restrictor was fully deployed, the device remained crucial for the air war that continued through 1941 and 1942. RAF pilots flew thousands of combat sorties, knowing their engines would respond reliably during desperate maneuvers. The restrictor gave pilots confidence. When you trust your aircraft to perform during critical moments, you fly more aggressively and effectively. That psychological advantage mattered as much as the technical one. Would Britain have lost without Schilling's restrictor? The Battle of Britain was won before full deployment, but the air war continued for years. The restrictor ensured that RAF pilots could fight on equal terms with their German counterparts through the grinding aerial battles of 1941 and 1942, when Britain was still fighting for survival. The restrictor remained standard equipment on Merlin engines until 1943, when Rolls-Royce finally introduced a Bendix-Stromberg pressure carburetor that eliminated the negative G problem entirely. But by then, the crisis had passed. Britain wasn't fighting for survival anymore. The Americans had joined the war. The Luftwaffe had bled itself white over Russia. Beatrice Schilling continued her work at RAE throughout the war. She contributed to engine development, carburetor improvements, and rocket propulsion research. After the war, she worked on the Blue Streak missile and jet engine development. In 1949, she was awarded the Order of the British Empire for her wartime contributions, one of the few women so honored for engineering work. She died in 1990 at the age of 81, having lived to see the Spitfire transform from desperate wartime necessity to beloved national icon. Her brass restrictor rarely appears in histories of the Battle of Britain. There are no memorials to it, no museum displays featuring the actual component. It was too simple, too unglamorous, too much of an improvised solution rather than brilliant innovation. But that's exactly why it mattered. Britain in 1940 didn't need elegant solutions. They needed something that worked, that could be implemented quickly, that could be installed on hundreds of fighters without grounding the fleet for months. Schilling understood that engineering brilliance sometimes means finding the simplest possible solution to a complex problem. A brass disc with a precisely drilled hole saved more pilots than any tactical doctrine or training program could have. The next time you see a Spitfire at an air show, graceful and iconic against the sky, remember that its legend rests on more than elegant aerodynamics and powerful engines. It rests on a 31-year-old woman who understood physics, rejected conventional thinking, and solved an impossible problem with a piece of brass you could lose in your pocket. If you found this story fascinating, hit that subscribe button. Next time, we'll explore how Polish mathematicians cracked the Enigma code years before Bletchley Park, using mathematics so clever that German engineers never imagined it was possible. You won't want to miss it.